afternoon, everyone. And for the longest time, marketing operated on a fairly simple belief. The more data you have, the better decisions will be made. But today, the equation is silently being rewritten because the conversation is no longer only about precision and personalization, it's also about trust, transparency, ownership, and increasingly data sovereignty. So, how do brands continue to create meaningful customer experiences in a world that is becoming far more privacy conscious? And that is exactly what we'll explore in this conversation. Thank you both for joining us. So, my first question is to both of you. If you had to identify the single biggest shift in how organizations are now thinking about marketing data today compared to 2 or maybe even 3 years ago, what would you say has fundamentally changed? I'll begin with you, Shani.
Yeah, thank you so much for the question, Aritra. I actually love this question itself and a fantastic opening as well. I think the single biggest shift, especially in the last 2 to 3 years, I would say is in the past, we used to look at data as a growth asset. Today, we're looking at it as a trust responsibility. In the last 3 years, in a lot of the meeting rooms, the kind of conversations we're having, earlier we used to ask questions like, how can we collect more data? How can we use more data and more touch points? Today, the questions have become, how can we create meaningful experiences with the limited data that we have? Or, in fact, we may have a lot of data, but where to use restraint, where to make sure we're not using data where it's not required. So that's how the conversation is changing in these meeting rooms. And the reason this is changing is actually consumers. I would say it's, one very clear thing is consumers have become very aware. India is like the top leading market for privacy for data. And that's why it's very important to get it right in this market. Once consumers have become smart, you don't want to use data in the wrong way. I think 92% of consumers have mentioned that, they are considering data privacy before they choose a brand. And that's why we started using it in IL as well to make sure that, hey, in relevant touch points, how can you make sure that you are protecting the consumer at that point of time?
And what is your opinion on the same, Dr. Goel?
Sure, Aritra, that's a great question. And thanks to Financial Express for having me here. See, I will respond. My response will be in reference to the data privacy laws, not only in India, but outside in Europe, GDPR or CCP and the US. See, what has changed is that now we are moving from passive observation to intentional relationship. So what that means is that instead of just tracking the cookies and where a digital footprint of the customer, we now have to actively take permission from the customer to be able to use that data. So a new concept called zero-party data has actually come off. Instead of using machine learning algorithms to figure out what the customer wants, you actually ask the customer, and then you collect the data. And this also requires consent. If you use data without consent, then it will be considered toxic. So it can actually come back and hurt you when the regulators go ahead and fine you, regarding this. So this is not happening yet, but I think after May 27, there will be a strong push towards this. The other thing is, there are centralized warehouses that are now coming up. So instead of having data in some CRM or in some marketing tool, marketers are encouraged to go and get data from this centralized warehouse where everything now comes together and the data is like anonymized, right? So that private information is not leaking out. So this is where I think the industry is kind of shifting if you look at it from the data privacy point of view.
But we do talk a lot about data privacy, but till date, still a lot of users do click on consent button without reading, without reading the entire terms and conditions. So from a brand perspective, Chandni, what does genuine consumer trust actually look like? And how do companies earn that trust beyond just simply meeting the compliance requirement?
This is fantastic because I always say that consent is a legal baseline. Trust is an emotional one. A consumer is giving you consent once when they open the app, but they're probably always renewing trust every time they open your app. So how do you create consistent behaviors on your app and on your product, which makes the consumer feel like they can trust your brand, right? Because in India, consumers have become more aware. It's, recent Cisco study also spoke about how consumers are now not choosing a brand because they have found issues with data privacy, right? Almost, and it was a very large percent, almost 80% plus. So if consumers are now ready to pay for data privacy, how should a business marketer look at this, right? And that's where we started realizing that consent is just the first step. Trust is the long-term game that you're into, and until you don't take this responsibility up completely, consumers are going to leave you. You can't fool them for too long.
And building on that, Dr. Goel, I'd like to ask that if trust is now becoming central to marketing strategy, how are organizations rethinking the underlying data architecture itself?
So again, I think organizations have not come to the realization that data privacy laws are going to come and hit them. But, if you were to build, like a privacy-first architecture, how would you do that? First of all, there is this concept of federated query. The whole idea is don't copy data, don't expose any raw information, and whatever you do it with explicit consent from the customer. That is the bottom line, and the architecture should actually support it. If I need information, I should have access to a centralized warehouse. I can run a query, the data will come back in an anonymized manner so that I can at least run my marketing campaign without knowing, who the underlying customers are. The other thing is the architecture involves something called a clean data room. What that means is that, if you are collaborating with other partners, like a brand is collaborating with a publisher, how do they access the same data? There's this concept of SQL templates, You don't give everything to the person, right? But you give specific templates which will pull out specific data only, right? So this is one way to control it. So this is an architecture part.
But what does genuinely like a privacy-first data ecosystem look like? And just beyond the terminology.
Right. See, a privacy-first, simply means that you cannot expose the PII information, personally identifiable information. So if you know my name, Shakti Goel, that is not PII. But with my email ID, with my phone number, with my address, with my Aadhaar ID, that becomes PII information. That cannot be exposed. But let's say if I have taken a flight from Delhi to Mumbai, Delhi to Bangalore, all these are transactions. If you can identify that I as a person has done that, then that is a violation of the law. But if you anonymize my ID, say that, ID 123 has taken these flights, that is okay.
Okay.
Right? Yeah, so that is where like the privacy architecture comes into play, yeah.
That works. And Chandni, when this shift moves into the strategy into execution, what actually changes for the team on ground?
Absolutely. I think just to add to the point that Shakti already walked us through is that in Aisle, when you look at data, the entire context is very different. In a lot of spaces like finance, medical, or even dating, there's a lot of personal information which does not really classify as PII, but it's a vulnerable moment for a consumer while they're sharing it. They're giving images, they're giving relationship goals, they're giving family backgrounds. So when you're making these decisions, that's when consent versus trust becomes a very clear interplay. Can they trust your brand in the future to give you this data? And coming to execution, now when you're a marketer, how do you execute your campaigns without making sure, like he spoke about encrypted data, how do you use that? The first, I think, as a marketer is creative is now becoming the new pixel. Every consumer has become very aware that today I spoke about Valentine's. Now everywhere I open, I'm getting a lot about Valentine's on my phone as well as on screen. I know I'm being stalked, right? So this is where a consumer starts understanding that this is intrusive and I don't think I can trust anyone with my data. That's the first step. So the minute you've realized the era of hyper-targeting is gone, you start saying, okay, now my creative needs to earn that click. It needs to earn that attention. Pixels are probably not going to do the job. How do you get more genuine, authentic, relatable, regional? Aisle uses creators, testimonials to speak to the consumer in a more meaningful way. That's the first change in execution that's coming on ground. Second, what we start realizing is it's forcing marketeers to have stronger listening tools. Right? Earlier we had data and then we had actually a lot of data and we were using it in only a few use cases. Now what's really happening, you're saying, hey, there's first party intent in multiple touch points, like we have IL experiences, like IRL events. There's a wealth of data which was never measured or tracked, but you are understanding a consumer at a ground level. There is product experiences, which is giving you a lot more information. You can get feedback loops through your product. How do you use that to make their journeys better, right? And the third, I think a lot of our metrics, I think Shakti will agree to this, a lot of metrics are turning into vanity metrics. Like CAC alone is not doing the entire storytelling. You need to go to downstream metrics, see the retention, see the engagement to say, hey, now is this really working? So that's what's changed on ground for execution.
So while you're talking about, what is working, do you think that teams are becoming more selective about how to use the data? Like, are success metrics changing constantly, or is it forcing a complete rethink?
Absolutely. I think now consumers, marketeers are becoming more disciplined, more creative with the limited data that they have. And now they're also going towards qualitative. The amount of information you say, hey, I need to get the context, cultural context right. South is working differently from North. I'm probably just painting one brushstroke across all. It's forcing us to get deeper, understand the consumer at depth, and that's why you're using different creators in South versus North. Now you're seeing regional content come into play. With AI, of course, a lot of it is also becoming possible. So metrics are changing from an engagement point of view, from retention, engagement, downstream metrics. That's what people, even marketers, are focusing on. Otherwise, if you remember back in the day, marketers just looked at top of funnel, and of course, we did have downstream, but the priorities were very different.
And my question to you, Shakti, is that how do businesses become more, like balance these privacy equations while continuing the pressure of, precision targeting, attribution, and measuring performance?
Yeah, so basically, I would say in this case, we want to have the cake and like eat it too, right? I mean, like you want to maintain privacy and still you want the level of data granularity. So see, the idea here is that you should not be able to store a person's data which can identify an individual. So my response will be from the technology point of view because I'm a technologist. So what we do is, you can have, small models, machine learning models running on the edge devices, and that will capture what the person is doing. The models will calculate all the parameters and they will send it to the central place, and thousands of edge devices are sending all these parameters and a large model can be created. So instead of pulling all the data into central place and then running the model, this is how you can capture and you have no idea who the person is. The other thing is, other thing is that you do look cohort analysis, right? So if a person is on a device, edge device, and the person is looking for a beach vacation while it's raining, your past experience or your algorithm might say that, look, anyone who is looking for beaches when it's raining is most likely to book. So on the edge device, suddenly, a pop-up will come out saying that if you book in the next 30 minutes, we'll give you 5% discount, 10% discount. So that is a conversion without knowing who the person is, right? You see, so we are doing marketing, we are doing conversion without knowing who the person is. Then there's another mathematical concept, it's called mathematical noise. So when you do cohort analysis, you have underlying data. Whatever the output is there, you introduce some mathematical noise to it. What that means is, what we're trying to prevent is reverse engineering. If I have a cohort, I should not be able to figure out who the underlying customers were. So this mathematical noise, this concept will do that for you. There are other techniques saying that, okay, you're doing cohort analysis, but your cohort has only 5 people, 10 people, less than 50 people, right? So rule of thumb is 50 people. If your cohort is less than 50 people, don't use that cohort, don't use it for marketing. But the best way approach here is for marketers to know how to invoke empathy and get the information from the customer, right? As like Chandni has said, that this trust, if you can build that trust with the customer will give you information, and then you can build campaigns, you can give, all these promotions which are to the benefit of the customers without being intrusive.
Talking about intrusiveness and all of this, I just want to know at what point does personalization become uncomfortable from a consumer standpoint, and how do brands, define where the boundary is? I would want to know from both of you on this.
Absolutely. I think that's a very important question, every marketer needs to think about today, because personalization had been a mantra for the last decade or so and even more, right? And with AI, we just thought, okay, now we've got more ammo to get there. However, with consumers, now what you really understand what's happening behind the screen, personalization is when you're making someone's life easy, right? Every time you're taking work away from them, they're happy that they're getting something done without any effort. Intrusive is when the consumers start feeling uncomfortable on your app. It is surprised that you have suddenly some more information, or you're tracking them without their knowledge. So that's when it becomes intrusive. And one mantra that we use at the dating app is, because the toughest trust to win, we realize in this category, is female trust. We need women participation. If you don't have equal gender ratio, the matches are not likely to happen. So if you need female, and that is even difficult to get, the trust is very tough from a woman in India to join an app like this. And the mantra we use is, would this woman recommend this app to her younger sister? And let everything flow from there. You'll start realizing that personalization then helps you take the correct decisions. It's about it's not only about it's actually using restraint, where not to use the extra data that you have. You may have encrypted chat data, you may have encrypted cohort data, but sometimes we overuse it, or we're not using it in the correct touch points. That's when your user journey is breaking. And bad personalization is, it harms the brand more than it helps. People will drop off, people will not trust you in the future, and they won't come. We actually created something called as frictional design. For the last 2 decades, we've always heard you should have frictionless user journeys, especially in the e-commerce world. But in this journey, we're starting to realize that when you put mindful friction in certain touch points, it's building trust, be it AI verification, selfie verification, mindful curation, moderation. All of these areas probably adds a little friction in your consumer journey, and you are probably also taking a hit. There will be some drop-off, but in the long run, you're winning consumer trust, and hence the word of mouth flywheel. So that's where we realized personalization versus intrusive helps out in that way. We saw female percentage actually go up to 30% instead of 5-10%, which is in the category. So long term, thinking long term to get your personalization right.
And Mr. Gul, what is your...
Yes, so see, I think like it also depends on the industry where personalization becomes helpful versus where it becomes spooky, So I'm like, if you are like in the dating industry or have a dating app, then something that is intended to help, a customer will spook the customer. But like in the travel industry, I'll tell you how personalization works is that, and there's something called, there's an algorithm called collaborative filtering, there's hierarchical recurrent neural networks, which something like Netflix would use, Amazon would use. It will group basically like customers. If you have taken a flight from Delhi to Bombay, I have taken Delhi to Bombay, then we are similar customers. You're taken from Bombay to Bangalore, but I have never flown from Bombay to Bangalore. But the collaborative filtering will say that I'm like you, so it will recommend the flight that you had taken, right? So this is the kind of personalization. I can scan, the customer feedback, have, like a RAG database or something, which will say that this customer does not like noisy rooms, right? So automatically when the hotel is booked, the room will be away from the elevator, away from, the kitchen and all that. So all this is helpful. When the person walks into the room, suddenly, the Frank Sinatra music is playing because that's what the customer likes, If it's a high net worth individual, if you've got a bottle of wine, the bottle of wine will be according to the taste. So when you see all this is okay. The person is not spooked, and this is where I think we have the personalization. But if you get all these offers, whenever you open a mobile phone, you hear a thing and say, here, like you had traveled to Vaishno Devi, now why don't you travel to Haridwar? All these things, that becomes annoying. And I think that's become intrusive. But as far as the safety aspect is concerned in travel, I have not experienced that kind of spookiness yet, yeah.
Okay, and let me close with this one question, that over the next 5 years, in the world where data is becoming so scrutinized, who do you think will be the ultimate winners? Will it be the people who use better technology, better data, or simply just better judgment?
Fantastic question, Arthur. Thank you. I think tech is going to get commoditized, right? With data and a lot of the DPDP acts that are coming in, it's going to even out the playing field, right? And a lot of people with AI have the same model, same access, commonality of resources. What's going to remain unique for brands and companies, in my opinion, is going to be judgment. the judgment of what not to do, the judgment of where to implement restraint. And restraint will always come at a cost. But did you take the correct trade-off and correct call to win in the long run? I think this is specifically very difficult because as a business person or as a marketeer, you will have cost to it and you will probably not want to take that risk. You will lose out in the short term, but in the long run, you're set to win.
So I would like echo the same sentiments, which like Chandni has expressed here. So like if you were to look at the pyramid, technology will be at the bottom, then you have data, then you have judgment on the top. Technology has become a commodity. When Yatra started in 2006, technology was not there. So Yatra had a unique proposition. Now you can open a B2C site overnight, It has become a commodity business. Data will see a lot of symmetry. And by symmetry, I mean, the tools that everyone is using will be similar. Amazon has tools, Google has tools, and if we are using the same tool, then all our customers will look alike. Unless you are able to capture some unique data about a customer which your competition doesn't have, and which is kind of rare. But so judgment will definitely come into play. If you are building movies or ads out of AI, then how are you different from the other person, right? What is that element that you are introducing here? If you say that, hey, maximize my sales, and all of a sudden the AI model starts giving a deep discount, you don't want that. So what you want to control there as part of a judgment is, yes, I want more sales, but I want the retention of my long-time customers also, right? Something like that. So if I were to draw an analogy, I mean, like if you look at a chef, chef has all the technology. They have the stoves, pots and pans. All that is there. Data is there. I mean, the ingredients are there, masalas are there, and they can make the same dish. But the dish will taste different. Why? Because of the judgment that the chef uses, and the marketers have to use the same kind of judgment to stand out from the competition. In a few years, we are looking at Gemini 3, which is still advanced. What if Gemini 5 and 6 come out? God knows what they will do, and everything will look the same.
That's true, and I think that's the perfect note to end this conversation on, because clearly what's becoming more important is not that data will grow in scale or sophistication, but it's all about the judgment that we take to move ahead. Thank you so much, Chandni. Thank you so much, Dr. Goel, for joining us today and having this honest and candid conversation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.